I think the number one thing is finding something you're passionate about. If you like finances, go niche down in accounting within a specific industry. If you like technology and you like security, go into cybersecurity. But don't pick something just because you think, oh, it's hot on the market or I can make tons of money. Because when you put that first, the burnout is going to happen so much quicker.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we have an incredible interview ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days, like today, we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space. Other days, we cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon and what those mean for them. Come by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that you'll be able to start doing to drive better results in your day-to-day. Sometimes we'll open it up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on, so send those to us at podcast@loxo.co. And occasionally you'll hear a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. For today's interview, I'm very excited to set the scene. What happens when margins take precedence over outcomes, especially in an industry like healthcare where patient continuity and patient outcomes are key and scaling for small to mid-sized practices trying to compete against, the major hospital providers like Kaiser Permanente? Is it worth it to niche down within an industry to serve the subsets of them, like those in the small to mid-sized practices? Or if a recruiter is thinking about doing something like this, how should they approach it? And so that's why I'm incredibly excited to introduce today's guest, Madison Loomis. She's the owner of Advanced Scope Partners, and she's going to share her experience in all of those items that I just listed out above. So with that, let's get into the conversation. Madison, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. That was
Yeah.
a great intro.
Oh, good. And yeah, I was laughing this morning as I was scrolling through LinkedIn. I saw your post, not even this morning, it's just a little bit ago, but you posted, my most played song for 2023 was Crazy Train. And I feel like that perfectly describes year one in business.
Oh, yeah.
That's the post.
And seriously, I looked at it, I was like, that is so sad. I'm not, because everybody shares their Spotify raps. And I was like, I'm going to not, because that was my number one song. And it was like, you played this an alarming amount of times.
I have a feeling that you aren't the only recruiter feeling that way after this year. So it's not
Yes.
just you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually my PR song for the gym. I don't know why. It just gets me going. But then I was like, this also is perfect for how the year has gone.
Yeah, it just fits in too many situations right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, getting into the recruiting side. So, why I'm excited for this conversation is you've taken I'll call it like the riskier path with how you recruit in the healthcare space. So, tell me a little bit about why you chose the healthcare niche that you did.
So I actually chose it because when I first started the business, my brother and I had kind of gone into it as a partnership. We weren't doing the same LLC, different ones, but that sadly didn't end up working out. But in that, there is a huge need in healthcare, and I had worked in healthcare previously and saw kind of the changes that had happened with COVID and this huge move and shift towards travel contracts and locum stuff. And I just thought, that can't be the solution. And having medical professionals in my family, I saw them coming off of elective surgeries, going into things that they weren't used to doing and didn't want to do because of the demand. And so you saw this huge shift from people staying put where they were and burning out to, I'm going to go make more money doing travel contracts, which kind of creates another problem, right? It solves the provider burnout problem and they're making more money, and creates another problem for the private practices who need that, continuity of care for patient outcomes and satisfaction. So combination of that, and then also just wanting to get back to my roots. I graduated college with a health sciences degree, thinking that I would go be a healthcare provider. And then the world of recruitment sucked me in, and here we are now. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, in that I think I'm able to combine my passion with healthcare with also being, the painkiller to some of the things that are going on in the industry right now.
So oftentimes there's we'll call like the aha moment when you realize like, oh, this is the change I need to make if I do want to go down this path. Do you
Mhm.
remember a specific moment like that in your journey?
Are we talking like big picture career wise or
When you wanted to niche
niche?
down a little
Okay.
bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it originally definitely stemmed from the fact that there is a huge need for mid-level providers. When you look at the market in itself, there
Mhm.
is a huge gap in access to care. Mid-level providers, physician assistants, and nurse practitioners solve that problem because they are able to collaboratively see patients independently, so that if your MD or your DO isn't available, you can go and see an NP or PA. And that opens up appointment times, and also you can spend more time with those providers.
Mhm.
There's a longstanding joke that somebody comes in and says, my sutures look great, thanks doctor, and it's like, that wasn't the doctor that did them. Most likely it was the PA, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's just always been that need from a healthcare ecosystem. And then I think there's a lot of people that recruit nurses, especially during COVID. It was like, oh, we're making millions of dollars recruiting travel nurses. And then on the physician front, you have the people that have always played in that space, but it's like, what about the mid-level providers? What about the,
Mhm.
the APPs? And so I think it was a space where there just wasn't a lot, tons of competition. And so I saw a hole there and was like, I'm going to jump on it, because what we're offering is completely different than what others are.
Yeah. Why do you think not many recruiters are playing in that space with the mid-level providers?
Um, I think because I think there's a few reasons. I think it's difficult. I think that the cost is relatively significant in terms of when you're recruiting doctors, you can charge a lot. And a lot of people are doing a percentage of salary. So if you take some of these doctors' salaries and then put 20 to 30% on that, you're making some decent cash, right? And then when you look at the nurse staffing, it's high volume and it's pretty easy. There's a million nurses out there. Niching down to providing recruitment for NPs and PAs is a new world. And I think it requires a little bit more of market expertise and also creativity in how you're going about it. And so I think that people shy away from it just because it hasn't been explored. And it's also not that it's new, but it's something that a lot of people don't see the need for them. And some practices don't utilize them. But I think, in the last decade and 20 years, it's become vital to the healthcare ecosystem.
hmm So one of the things I like to do most about or with this show, and it's after listening to so many podcasts, is you hear all these success stories from people, and it's like, I, made millions of dollars. I increased our ROI, but it's like, how did you do that? That's what I want to know. So
Yeah.
that's what I want to get into with you a little bit here is
Sure.
so if someone were to want to start thinking about how do they niche down today, like do you have, steps, process, any types of recommendations that you might think about if you were to teach someone how to go about this?
Yes, definitely. I think the first and probably the most important, and this it also relates to recruiter burnout and agency burnout, is actually enjoying the space that you're recruiting in.
hmm
You can make a lot of money in a lot of different industries. And I think there's been trends over the years of, like, you look at COVID and travel nursing was it. And then you talk to the people that burned out of that, and it's like their heart really was never in helping nurses or in the healthcare industry. And that's okay. Or you look at technology people, I was probably one of them. And I'm passionate about technology, but it doesn't rile me up the way that healthcare does. And so for me, I think the number one thing is finding something you're passionate about. If you like finances, go niche down in accounting within a specific industry. If you like technology and you like security, go into cybersecurity. If you like cars, go into the automotive industry. But don't pick something just because you think, oh, it's hot on the market or I can make tons of money. Because when you put that first, the burnout is going to happen so much quicker. And I think that's been something I've learned in my own career. And hence why I'm going back to healthcare, because I just got burnt out in tech.
Interesting. So was that around the time when a lot of the layoffs were happening over the past year and a half that started to spur that?
Yes, I was working for a great company. They were within cybersecurity, and I had previously recruited in tech, both internal and external from a staffing perspective. But then it almost felt passionless for me because a lot of these companies weren't doing the greatest. And then it's
Hmm.
like, you don't want to misrepresent. It was just hard to feel like my personal brand was going to carry in a way that I agreed with or aligned with, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Um, and it was just, like, hey, while the market's low, why don't I go try this? Because if I'm not going to try it now, I don't think I ever would have. So it's like, hey, I could get laid off tomorrow, or I could go like create my own future and not have to worry about
Yeah,
that.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, taking control of it at the end of the day, it's
Yeah.
much better to do that. So,
Yeah.
um, great little tangent there. As we move into, you started to think about your niche. You went into the healthcare specific space. I'm sure you had times when people that weren't quite the businesses, the companies of roles that you wanted to be working with came your way. What do you do when those come across? Because it's like, I know right now it's like, take anything you can get as a recruiter. Is that
Mm.
the thought that you followed, or what did you do there?
Yeah. I think I'll say this in that I'm a very forthright person, and I've always been this way. And probably to that point, there were times where I shouldn't have been this way. But if I feel like there's disrespect, or I feel like a candidate's not going to be treated fairly, or vice versa, right? A candidate that I don't want to work with, that I'm like, this person's just, no, I'm not representing this person, I won't do it. And I think you could look at it from a sake of, oh, that's money on the table. Well, yeah, until that person leaves because they're not good. And then you've got to backfill it. And now you've made a poor reputation with your client, who now no longer trusts you. And then on the other side with the candidates, now that candidate could go tell out someone else, well, don't work with them because they match you to really crappy clients. And so I've had instances where I've had clients and or candidates that I'm just not impressed with, and I don't think that they hold the caliber of the same values. And I'm like, hey, no hard feelings, but this isn't what I want to spend my time on. And I think that is exactly why being a business owner and doing it your way is just beautiful. Because when you work for an agency and you've got that KPI or that metric, or somebody, like cutthroat, how many calls did you make or how many placements did you make? It very quickly shifts from doing the right thing to doing just what gets closest to the dollar.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where, especially as you think about long term as a business owner versus the short
Yes.
term, I just want to get, my next paycheck. That's
Yeah.
going to set you up for much more long term success. And so,
Yep.
one thing you're talking about there is, you really know the exact type of people you want to work with, you don't want to work with. I don't think many people take the time to go through this type of exercise. As a marketer, I more than understand this, but as a recruiter,
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about how you approach this and thinking about, like, what kind of exercise did you do here to understand that?
Yeah. So I think it's number one, knowing your own values and knowing, like, in the past, if I've worked with X, Y, and Z, what has kind of rubbed me the wrong way, right? Like, what do you think is the right way of doing something? And you're not going to be 100% with every single client either. Like, there's going to be some things that you're like, but it might be something that's so minuscule and small that it really doesn't impact the quality of the placement or the business or the service that you're providing. But I think for me, it's understanding who you're going after, from also just like a larger picture of, like, we work with smaller companies, private practices. We don't go after, huge hospital systems. And so if somebody comes to me from that space, unless it's an opportunity that's a siloed thing where they're their own institute of the hospital, then I'll refer it out because we don't have the bench to work with those types of folks. And so I think understanding also your capacity, and if you actually can be a solution to those folks as well. And it's also just being very clear and transparent when you're doing intake calls, and not just rushing to get a signed contract, because anybody can get a signed contract, especially if it's contingent. Um, Whether or not you actually want to work that contract is a different question. And if you're actually going to get a candidate that's going to make up for the time you spent recruiting for that that
Hmm.
contract.
All the
So,
fun.
yeah. So I think it really boils down to knowing yourself, knowing where kind of that line in the sand is, right? I had a client that basically made an offer without letting me know so, and then proceeded to yell at me because the candidate turned it down, and I had no idea they even made an offer. And I'm like trying to backpedal my way into this and help the situation, and they're just like screaming and yelling and calling me on a Friday night, and I was like, you know what? I don't want your business, and I'm going to tell the candidate, like, I'm good. If they want to work with you, great, but I'm not invoicing you for this. Like, we're good to go, you know? And I think a lot of people won't do that just for the sake of collecting.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Let's shift a little bit and talk about the branding side of it. So it's like you can go through
Sure.
and make all these decisions, but the market has to recognize you. They have to know
Hmm.
what you do, who you help. How did
Definitely.
you position yourself within the market as you made the switch?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just speaking to it and talking to the right people, right? So I've built up a good network, I'd say, on LinkedIn, and so letting people know that are involved with me there, hey, I'm making this transition, and here's why, and here's what I hope to do. I think a lot of people sometimes can shy away from that, but you kind of have to be not obnoxious about it, but you've got to put it in people's ear, so that they know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that's key. Also, I think connecting with other leaders in that space, who already have a platform. So if you're going to be going and specializing in cybersecurity recruitment, well, who are the top leaders in that space? Not only from a recruiting standpoint that you could do split desk agreements with to kind of get started, but also people that are on the other side of candidates that you're recruiting, leaders in the space that you can talk to and network with without the intention of selling to them, but just being a part of what they're doing and how they've been able to influence the industry.
Okay. And I know healthcare providers are notorious for not being on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Recruiters are notorious for being on LinkedIn.
Yes.
How have you, without giving away any of your secrets or anything, but like how have you found success in just being able to engage with them when you know that it's not like they're just scrolling LinkedIn?
Right.
Any thoughts there, as I say, without giving away your
Sure.
secrets?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even think it's a secret. I mean, there's a million and one job boards and organizations, certain things that I go to. Like, I went to the AAPA conference in Nashville, and I just walked around and met people with no
Hmm.
intention of getting them into a job or selling them business, just meeting people and getting a temperature check on who else is, has a table here, and what are they selling, and what are they talking about, and what organizations are showing up for these folks, and how can I also be a part of that. I also think it boils down to, and this is another thing that I think has been great, is that PAs and advanced practice professionals, I have found a lot of them actually are on LinkedIn, in comparison to like nurses
Hmm.
and doctors as well. But there's also networks like Doximity, and you've got different places, and then of course referrals, right? Those are going to be your strongest bets of, you place somebody, and if they're great, they have a great network, and they can
Yeah.
refer you.
That's such an underrated, I mean, any aspect. I mean, marketing, I see it with our customers. I'm sure you see it with others, especially when you
Yes.
get into a space like healthcare. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very underutilized area there.
Yep.
So, all right, we've gone through a couple different,
Hmm.
steps, tactics that people can start using. Once they do make this switch, once they start implementing this, they've updated their branding, they're making the connections. What kind of indicators should you be looking to understand if the decision that you made is the correct one for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a few different things that you can look at. And I'll say here too, I think a lot of agency owners, and I'm guilty of it in myself, like the first 6 months, you're like, how come I'm not getting, inbound leads? And it's like, wait a minute here, take it easy. It takes time to saturate an already pretty saturated market.
Hmm.
But I think if you stay consistent to that niche that you're going to find, you will have people lining up, even if it's only a few at first. And over time, hard work and consistent efforts on the branding, on doing a good job, is going to come back and bless your business. But back to your question in terms of how you kind of measure that success, I would say looking at your pipeline. I don't think that having a huge pipeline is necessarily the way to go. I think having a lean pipeline, and so if you've got a niche, having people that you can lean on for referrals, even if it's not somebody that's actively in the market, will help you versus being a generalist when you're just reaching out to anybody and everybody, and you've got a database of a million people, but you can't do anything with them,
Hmm.
right? Um, Looking at your market coverage. So, how many people within my niche do I currently know? And then how many left do I still have to get to know? And where are those people? If they're not on LinkedIn, are they at a conference? Are they on a different platform? where are they engaging and where are they hanging out? And you've got to put yourself there. And so if your pipeline isn't growing, maybe do some of those things. But I would also say your brand depth, right? So after a year or two, you should start to see inbound folks coming your way. Again, if you're doing a good job, word will spread and people will reach out. And you've got to look at that too and report on that. Make note of where every potential lead coming in is from. Is it from somebody that's worked with you? And ask. Don't be afraid to say, how did you hear about us? Where did you find us? Who else are you speaking to about this? Especially as a staffing agency. And if you're small, you'd be amazed. I've asked this question and I'm being compared to people that have been doing this for 35 years. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like a confidence booster at the same time as knowing like I'm doing something right. And then I would also say looking at your billings and just being super crystal clear on where you stand with your business, right? Like, yes, volume, I don't always think that volume equates to success, but is a numbers game. And so looking at your pipeline, looking at your placements, looking at your average billings, all of that kind of stuff, you need to know where you're at so that if you're setting goals, there's a true roadmap and it's not just willy-nilly in the air.
Yeah, I really like that. Especially when you're talking about the lean pipeline there. That's something at my
Mm-hmm.
last organization, our CEO would talk about all the time. He's just like, you want, and it's in the name, you want a pipe, you don't want a funnel. Things should be
Mm-hmm.
flowing through. You should be optimizing what you have and really focusing hard on that. So the more that you do that,
Yeah.
like it's a lot less work. It's easier. You go
Mm-hmm.
exactly where you want to. So that's something that I love that you called that out specifically.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at the flip side now.
Sure.
What's an objection? What's something that scares off people from making a decision like this to niche down, and how might you say, like, here's what you should think about, or here's how you could overcome that?
Yeah. Um, I think you're going to hear this, and I've heard it. I've heard it from people that I think very highly of who have been mentors to me. And they're like, hey, maybe like you shouldn't. I had one person who I respect the heck out of him, but he's like, you're very close to pigeonholing yourself in that space. And I said, good. Like, that's what I want. And maybe there's room for me in the future to be able to branch out. But for the sake of my sanity, I mean, running a business, you understand when you're trying to focus on too many things at once, it can get hectic quick and it can take away and dilute from what you're doing over here. But then the flip side of that is like, well, if you put all your eggs in one basket and it doesn't work out, then what? You know? And I think that's why a lot of these bigger staffing agencies do become generalists and they just throw anything at a wall. And if it sticks, great, let's run with it. And that's what I'm trying to change is, down the road, do I want to move back into tech? Sure, yeah, at some point. But for right now, I mean, it's only been a year, so I need to stay consistent with it. And it takes longer than that to really saturate and optimize the market you're already in. And I would argue that it's easier to saturate it if you're focused on one thing rather than 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
go deep
again,
versus the oil spill on top. Going deep
yes,
in the specific space and really
yep,
having a presence there.
for sure.
Okay. Oh, this is helpful. I could geek out on this all day. Any like parting wisdom or just like a quick wrap synopsis that you want to leave our listeners with?
Sure, yeah. And I just did another podcast about a month ago and I ended it with the same thing. And I think it's so important because I've talked to people who want to start their own agency. And I do it too. Like I look at some of these people and again, I admire the crap out of them, but they're billing $2 million a year. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Like I am running this business completely bootstrapped. It is my life savings, is my first year, and I've had an awesome year and I'm very thankful for that, but I'm not billing 2 million, and maybe one day I will be, but I look at some of these people and it can discourage you, but you also have to remember that everybody's coming from a different starting point. Some people might have investors, some people might have saved for longer than you have to be able to invest more upfront in the business. Some people are in different industries that move quicker. Some people are doing contracting versus, permanent placement, and you can't let that take away from the confidence or the want to start, because building a lifestyle business, which for me, I don't necessarily want to build and become this mega agency, because that's kind of what we preach in our value proposition, is that it's okay to run a business that doesn't bill millions of dollars and still be successful.
And that's such an important thing because you have no idea what that person who is billing, or you might have an idea, like 2 million a year, what their life looks like. They might be working 16-hour days. They might be unhealthy in other ways. I mean,
Sure.
granted, they could have it all figured out, but they might be 25 years into it and have a system at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, what you said, especially, it's like you're taking this as a lifestyle agency where it's like, you know, the life that you want, what you need to be happy, comfortable, to
Hmm.
do everything, and finding that happy medium. It doesn't always need to be 100% growth year over year, or this like crazy unobtainable goals that will
Yeah.
just stress you out to no end.
Exactly. And I would also argue that you need to go slow to go fast if you're doing it the right way. It's like anything in life. You get into something too quickly, or you make decisions for the sake of the billings, and it can hurt you in the long run. And maybe some people nod and my hat goes off to them, but I don't know. I'll keep it at that.
Yeah. Yes. Perfect. Well, this was phenomenal. I truly appreciate you taking the time to come join us on this show. I mean, sharing
Yeah,
this
of
knowledge
course.
is absolutely invaluable, and hopefully it inspires some recruiters to really start thinking about how they might want to be incorporating this into next year. And also hopefully next year, if we have a part 2 to this, Crazy Train is not your
Oh,
most
yes.
listened to song again. We've got something a little bit more calm for
Or maybe it
2024 ahead.
is.
In a good way.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. You can find the show notes in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcasts. And we'll also have a full video episode available for this on YouTube. Everyone, that's the show. That was an incredible interview with Madison Loomis. I'm so glad she joined us. So thank you all. Until next time.
Thank you.